Okay, we're going to get started. If everyone can take a seat, we'll get started in just a minute. God, they moved that podium back. Last time we were kind of like sitting behind the podium.
Were you? You made a heckle shot from the back. Tell them to stop talking.
Okay, we're going to get started. My name is Dennis Willard. Maybe some of you were here for the last panel. But just tell you a little bit about myself. I have a company, Precision New Media. It's a communications, public relations firm. We work to elect Democrats. We work in the progressive arena, a lot in Ohio with my good friend Liz Walters here, but also around the country. We have worked in Kansas and have some experience there and looking into what's gone on in that state. And today we have three panelists from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan to talk about those states. You have some pieces of paper. I'd like you to write questions down in the first 20 minutes or so, and we'll come around and collect them because I want this to be interactive. You know, this is really a tale of three states, and these three states are very similar. And I think the reason we wanted to have Pennsylvania and Michigan represented today is in those states you saw last year there was a governor elected in Pennsylvania and a U.S. senator, and in Michigan we have a legislature that is now Democratic and a governor who's Democratic, and in Ohio, pardon me? And a Supreme Court that's Democratic. The Supreme Court that's Democratic, and we'll learn about that in this conversation, more about that. And we have Liz Walters, who I've known for more than a decade now, who has been just doing an amazing job as chairwoman of the Ohio Democratic Party. And I tell her this all the time, and she doesn't want to hear it. I want her to be chairwoman for 20 plus years. We need stability in that position.
Dennis wants me to die before I turn 60.
But I do think that I think that she has such a vision to get things done in the immediate, but also long term. But I do want to turn it over to the panelists, and I'm going to ask them each a question. I'm going to start with Liz to actually, let's start with, and your first name is Deb Ciamacca.
Right.
And Deb Ciamacca from Pennsylvania to talk about what's going on in Pennsylvania. Tell us a little bit about that.
So Pennsylvania has gone through a lot of turmoil in the last year, some of it good, some of it bad. For one thing, we elected a Democratic Senator, John Fetterman. So we're very proud of that. I would say part of the success of Fetterman is not that he didn't do a great job, but we had Oz, who ran a terrible campaign against him. We also had a great gubernatorial candidate, Josh Shapiro, 49-year-old, who's held almost every big office in Pennsylvania and has a bright political future. He's positioning himself sort of as a centrist. We also flipped the Pennsylvania State House from red to blue, which is amazing.
That gets class too.
I ran for the State House in 2020. I quit my teaching job in large part to make that happen. And so I feel a little bit of satisfaction for that happening. We still only hold a one-seat majority there, so it's very tenuous, to be honest with you. And the state Senate is really, really red, unfortunately, and that's we had gerrymandering of the state Senate map. And we don't have ballot initiatives in Pennsylvania. So, I tried to explain this to high school students because I taught government and why some states have initiatives and some states don't, but we don't have initiatives in Pennsylvania. I am from one of the collar counties around Philadelphia, Delaware County, and we have been gradually flipping the collar counties from red to blue. Our county flipped from red to blue in 2019. Prior to that, it had been red since the Civil War. And I moved from Chester County, which had similarly been red since the Civil War. So we're starting to flip. We still have one collar county in Bucks County, which you may have heard of Central Bucks School District, which is banning books and doing lots of Trumpian kind of things there. So that's one county that we have not quite yet mastered. The rural parts of Pennsylvania are, much like Ohio, they're very, very red. And I think the good thing that Fetterman did was to speak to all the counties and to make himself known there. But we have a lot of work to do in the rural parts of the state. You may have heard of Pennsylvania being, we having Alabama in the middle of it. I think one of the pundits said that a few years ago. I think it's very true. There's a recognition that we have to do more. So.
Thank you. And Bryan Watson is a political activist from Michigan. And Michigan, Deb just mentioned that Pennsylvania does not have the ballot initiative. In Ohio, we're fortunate to have that, and obviously in Michigan, you're fortunate to have that. Yep. And Bryan, tell us a little bit about how the ballot initiative helped you with same-day voter registration, how same-day voter registration helped you get out more voters, and how that's helped you become more blue.
Sure. We talk about, I think people have heard about Michigan, what happened in Michigan in 2022. The legislature flipped for the first time in 40 years. We have the governor, secretary of state, and the attorney general, and have had for now, a second term. I'm sorry. You got it. I should point, yes, that they will point this out. All women. I remember voting in 2018, and when I was done with my ballot, this is in the Democratic primary, I said to somebody, this is the first time I can remember where everybody I voted for was a woman. Every single one. I gotta say, and they all won their primaries. The excitement that we all have, certainly in Michigan and in some surrounding states, about what happened in 2022 would not have happened except for 2018. And 2018, I will say this out loud, would not have happened without Donald Trump winning Michigan in 2016. Because that was the kick in the butt that everybody needed to I'll say it, get woke. Right? You needed to get woke and say, this is not the Michigan that's been there for years and years and years. It is neither the Michigan that was, running under a red trifecta and a red triplex for years. It's not the Michigan of the old labor movement, but the labor is still there. So in 2018, and I'll get back to 2022, but in 2018, Michigan does have the ability, what I call direct democracy. And that is, we can put a proposal on the ballot that neither the legislature nor the governor can stop, right? And these are constitutional amendments. We can't pass laws this way, we can't repeal laws this way, but we can change the Constitution through direct voter ballots. And it took one person in a week, I think, after the 2016 election results were known, to put a post on Facebook saying, I want to end gerrymandering, who's with me? And from that one Facebook post, tens of thousands of volunteers, as well as really strong organizers, people who knew how to put an organization together, and yes, who know how to fund it, came together, and we got rid of legislative gerrymandering. It is now gerrymandered by an independent commission. 2022 would not have happened if the legislature, which was blue, or which was red, was still in charge of redistricting. So that kind of thing, there's a lot more to talk about, but that's an example. In that same 2018 election, there was another constitutional amendment that changed the infrastructure for voting. Yeah. Right? So yes, same-day registration. Anybody could get an absentee ballot for any reason, which became critical when it was pandemic voting, right? Because nobody wanted to show up at the polls. They wanted to send these ballots in. There's a whole number of changes to how we vote. Passed in 2018, took effect in 2020, and as a consequence, we had 2022. So I think your point is exactly right on. We do have great candidates. I mean, not diminish that, and we do have a really strong party. But those two ballot initiatives, both of which were nonpartisan, both of which came outside the Democratic Party, right? They were done by grassroots people, and that changed everything, and changed it in 6 years. We were done. So that's the brief story.
Thank you, Bryan. And I'm going to turn to Liz in just a second. And please, if you have questions, write them down now. I'd really like this to be interactive, and we're asking the panel questions from you. Liz, I know that you've been around I've worked with you for a decade now. Mm-hmm. You were executive director of the Ohio Democratic Party. Now you're chairwoman. I know that you're looking around at things that other states are doing right.
Yeah.
What do we do here in Ohio to turn the tide?
I love this question. How much time am I allowed to talk? So, listen, I want to say thanks to everybody for being here. This was when Joe Miller and Jim reached out, they sent me a whole list of things. I'm like, actually, I don't want to do any of those. Can I be on these two panels? And this was one of them. And I'm so grateful to be here with folks from Michigan and Pennsylvania. The Michigan chairwoman, Lavora Barnes, is like my mentor in this work. I was elected chair in 21. She had been a chair, and she is so gracious with her time. So I'm a huge Lavora fangirl. And the whole Democratic movement in this country is lucky for her leadership. And I know there's a new chairman in Pennsylvania, Chairman Street, who's been great. So I think one of the things that's the most exciting about stuff like this is I get to hear and learn, because I think coming into this, right, I think what anybody who lives in Ohio knows is we've got to figure some stuff out, right? We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. My predecessor, who's in the back of the room, David Pepper, did an amazing job of taking huge strides on the Supreme Court, which is a really powerful avenue for us. And of course, what happens when Democrats start to gain power? Entrenched Republican power in Ohio fights back by changing the rules, by rigging the game. And so what we are living through right now is, in Ohio, this transition moment of trying to realign not just the party, but the entire progressive ecosystem. So all of our aligned organizations who share our goals into a new vision for what does Ohio need to do to build back long-term meaningful power. And tough news is that there's no single one thing that's gonna fix this. It's many things, and it's gonna take time. And I think as we move forward, one of the things I'll ask you all to do in this work is to remember that, because every year, and coming into 22, we know standing up here of, all right, how's it gonna go? I was elected chair, and 6 days later, Rob Portman announced he was retiring. I was like, oh shit, excuse my French. We have got to get this figured out. I came into the work as chair to Dennis's joke earlier, thinking this is gonna be a long-term project. This is not a quick fix. We have a lot of fundamental things we have to do, both as a party to organize ourselves, to figure out what are the things that only we can do and should do that will help us succeed, but also to work in coalition with a broad set of partners to really move the mountain on structural change, same-day voter reg being key. I want to highlight, before I turn it back over to Dennis, a couple of things that we are thinking a lot about in Ohio. One is just how much the geographic and demographic makeup of Ohio has shifted. I say that I'm a proud Northeast Ohioan. I'm born and raised and still live in Akron. I'm a graduate of Cleveland State. For 60 years, Democratic success has been solely based on the great state of Cuyahoga. And it is still strategically very important for us. But for the first time, we saw in the census results that Franklin County, Columbus, Ohio, is now the behemoth by over 1 million more voters. And we have not invested in developing voter behavior, in registering folks, in building structure in these emerging population centers for our state. And so and Cincinnati is growing in that vein too. So that's number one, right, is getting our hands around what does the data show us about what's the map of the future. And it involves, yes, building up and we're doing our work in Cuyahoga County. We're never going to it's home to so many Democrats, but investing at the same scale that we've invested in Cleveland for the last 20 years in these places. We also have a really fast growing level of support in are suburban counties immediately around all these places. So I know there's someone here from Delaware County, which is one of the fastest growing parts of the state for us. So doubling down on these suburban places where we are gaining 5-6 points a cycle with almost no work. And so how do we put our back into that and make that change happen faster? But in that work, right, also really being mindful that we are uncovering lots of realities about just how much harder it is to do the work in Ohio than it is in our Midwestern counterparts. And that's largely because of two things. One, our size. We are still the 7th largest state in the union. We have 12 million people. To get to the scale we need to get to do this work, it's going to take a lot more than we got now, right? You guys remember like Obama 08, there was 100 staff on the ground, just 100 field organizers. I don't think we're going back to that as much as I wish we were, but like that's the level of scale that needs to happen in Ohio for us to succeed. We did not get there in 22. We got about halfway there. And then number two, beyond the size and the cost, is also just acknowledging the structural barriers we face because of entrenched Republican power. Whether that is our gerrymandering, we have the campaign that Bryan was talking about, it's people, not politicians, amazing stuff. We need people, not politicians, right? And I think we are talking a lot about a ballot initiative over the next couple of years to move ourselves to a Michigan model for redistricting. We also have to tackle same-day voter reg. Every other, except Pennsylvania, Deb and I, we're the only 2 states, although you guys only, I think, self-identify as Midwest sometimes. But in the Midwestern cohort of Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, all these places where we're seeing the battle for Democratic power really succeeding, or at least holding on, they all have same-day voter reg, every single state. It increases turnout at a minimum of 6% in every single election. So you think about 6%, how much did Tim Ryan lose by? 6%. Right? Now, not a silver bullet, but these structural changes are really important. And then the last thing I'll say, my counterparts here have been doing this a little longer and have made more progress, is building up the institutions of power for Democrats. When we don't have government, when we don't have a majority in a state house, or we don't hold a governor's office, the strength of the institution on the party side becomes more important than ever. And that's not just the Democratic Party, it's also my partners like Innovation Ohio, which is a research and comms hub for the progressive movement, for our reproductive rights friends who are leading this ballot initiative that we're all a part of right now. Their strength is all of our strengths. And so having good leaders that have we all are aligned on the same set of data and are working towards that end is really mission critical for us. So no big deal, guys. We'll get right on it.
Thank you, Liz. And
I'm going to collect questions, so if you could just put it up in the air so I don't have to go to the table.
And I want to say, Bryan mentioned initiatives, state ballot initiatives being so critical to success. Right now, we're under attack in Ohio on the direct democracy route that Bryan talked about. There's a resolution in the House Joint Resolution 1, and it's a companion resolution in the Senate, Senate Resolution 2, that would raise the threshold for amending the Ohio Constitution to a 60%, basically putting the majority out of rule and the minority in power, which is what the Republicans want to do. So I think, please pay attention to that, get involved in that, fight back against that, help us, because we're going to need that. Liz and I first met on the We Are Ohio campaign back in 2011 when we went with direct democracy to the ballot to overturn Senate Bill 5, which would have taken collective bargaining rights away from public employees in Ohio. And we were successful. The legislature and John Kasich bullied it through, and we were able to fight back and overturn that. And so, I want to go to Pennsylvania now and go to Deb and ask her, you don't have the ballot initiative, so how do you build capacity in Pennsylvania without having what Michigan had, which was a way to get voters involved, register, engage, and rage kind of voters. What do you do there
I mean,
to change things?
The company or the nonprofit that I used to work for, Promote the Vote, which is part of Turn PA Blue, we have to have groups outside of the Democratic Party assisting them in working towards these kind of initiatives. And I mean, we've been fighting. One of the things that's still going on is that we're being attacked to take away our voting rights right now. Drop boxes being taken, for example, in Delaware County, myself and several other elected officials worked to reinstall drop boxes that had been yanked out of the cement because the Republicans had convinced people that they were, God's or the devil's gift to Pennsylvania. So we use outside groups a lot. We're jealous of the fact that we don't have initiatives. For example, we have a group called Fair Districts Pennsylvania, which was the first group that I joined after Trump was elected in 2016, because I knew that gerrymandering was such a devastatingly horrible thing that was happening in Pennsylvania. And Fair Districts has been, for years now, has been trying to get a bill through Pennsylvania to do exactly what you're doing in Michigan and what you aspire to in Ohio. And, we can't get the committee chairs. As you know, the rules in the legislature are really important. Or maybe some of you don't know this, but one committee chair has prevented, almost everyone in the legislature, Republican or Democratic, from wanting to put forth a bill that would have a nonpartisan committee for redrawing the lines. So it's a tough slog right now. Basically, what the Republicans want us to do is to trade things like, for example, we can't pre-canvass votes. So you'll notice that Pennsylvania is going to be always one of the states that's the last to come out for on election night, because we can't open up any of the mail-in ballots until 7 a.m. on the day of the election. Republicans want to trade this. They want us to have voter ID. We don't have voter ID right now. And so they want to put in a very stringent voter ID so that we can get pre-canvassing. The only thing that has prevented that is we have had massive grassroots outpouring led by these groups like Turn PA Blue to prevent this from happening. So it's tough. I mean, it is really tough. We really have, that's why on the ground organizers are so important.
Thank you. And I want to go to Bryan and ask you a follow-up question on that, Liz. I mean, right now you're sitting in the catbird seat because Michigan's doing so well, but what can you do better and what can you learn from other states? Because, it's still going to be a tough battle. You still have the Betsy DeVosses, et cetera, up there meddling. And what's Michigan, what are we going to see from Michigan to make it even better for Democrats?
Well, yes, we had a great 2022 election. We feel really good about it. Certainly, especially and surprisingly, flipping the legislature. But we have a 2-seat majority in each house. That means we lose one vote, either a vote on a bill or a seat in an election. And I hear that some of these sitting members are running for mayor, which means they'll be out this year. So if it's the catbird seat, but the seat is pretty darn hot right now, we got a lot of, we can't afford to drift. We can't afford to drift. But the thing that we've got going for us now is that I believe people have seen that if they organize and rise up, they can change everything, right? We changed the voting infrastructure. We changed the redistricting.
Restored collective bargaining just this last week.
Exactly. We restored the right collective bargaining. We repealed, one of the few states to do this, repealed right to work, which had been just amazing. It had been shoved down our throat by a Republican legislature and governor back in 2012. So there's a lot of undoing things. People are genuinely feeling empowered. And my fear, of course, as an activist, is I don't want to see what I've seen from Democrats for in the past, which is, we won, I'm done, and they go home, right? And the next election, you lose it all. And how many times have we seen this? Barack Obama won in 2008. What happened in 2010? Or Bill Clinton won in 1992. What happened in 94? So our challenge now, our charge, is to keep the energy up, and to do that, we need to do all the things that we normally have to do. It's just that we can now point to a winning record, and people will say, hey, that worked, let's get on board. I should mention also in 2022, we passed by a proposal, a constitutional amendment, and that embedded reproductive freedom in the Michigan Constitution, which is not just abortions, it's birth control, it's IVF, it's everything having to do with that. So it's Roe plus, and we got that in the Constitution. I'll also say, and I do want my friend here, Joe, to jump in. I'll also say that the same proposal capability that is available to us is available to the other side. Right? There's no reason why they can't get all the signatures, put it on the ballot, and in fact, they tried to do that in 2022 to block, to put in some things about voting, and they couldn't get the signatures. What does that tell us? That's the story for us, is they couldn't even get the signatures to get it on the ballot, and we were turning in record numbers of signatures for our side. So we got a challenge. Joe, you want to add to that?
Yes, please.
You had asked what's up for Michigan. County commissions are under attack. Constitutional sheriffs are coming out of the woodwork to threaten county government, and school boards are under attack. So those are the fronts that we're kind of now grappling with. And libraries. We have a library closed because they wouldn't ban books, and the people voted down Opry.
Right. For all the victories that we had down at the bottom of the ballot, we didn't get the school boards that we wanted. We did have some issues with the county, down at the county level. So there's a lot of work still to be done there. But
We'll keep up the good work. And I'm going to turn to Liz. And Liz, Deb mentioned that there's been outside groups that have helped the party. And the thing I love about Liz, when she was answering the first time, you could tell she's a builder. She's talking about putting structure in place. I've worked on a lot of campaigns, and sometimes when you work on a campaign, I always say it's like a sandcastle you build on the side of the beach. After the campaign is over, the water comes in and washes away that sandcastle, and there's no trace of it. And that happens a lot of times with campaigns. And what we do need is to build structure. And Liz is all about building structure. But how critical is it to have organizations, groups, individuals like Deb was talking about in Pennsylvania to be helping you with this?
It's so important, and at the risk of making this super nerdy and getting in the weeds, but I feel like this group will appreciate that, is there's actually really compelling legal reasons and financial reasons for why it's not just the party. There needs to be a strong outside voter registration group. The NAACP voter fund needs to be active. All of our different groups need to be high functioning, because since Citizens United was passed, we all know that horrible law that gave corporate leaders, I'll use that word, unlimited political speech. It also shifted how money moves in the progressive system too. And that, coupled with federal election law and a whole host of other things, means that there's a lot of tactics that are very expensive that it is just more efficient to do with the 501c4, with a partner. Because, for example, Deb's group can raise money from a foundation to do voter registration. That's awesome. I can't raise that money, right? And so it's like, to her point of many hands make for lighter work, we have to find many, many partners in this space. And in Ohio in particular, because the state is so big and so diverse, asking one organization to be the perfect messenger with all the tactics for every single voter we need to talk to is just not really realistic. So it's really understanding how do we divide and conquer with the work or working partnership on different projects.
And I think that's really critical, because a lot of times I think, the Ohio Democratic Party or the county parties, et cetera, get burdened with too much responsibility when it is a collective effort. And that's the reason I wanted Liz to address that, because it is all of us that has to do this. I will say this, and David, when David was chairman, and now that Liz is chairwoman, I'll be working on something. I don't even know these two know I'm working on it. And I'll get a call at 10 o'clock at night, and Liz will say, hey, I know you're working on this. And she starts, either asking me.
Literally at 6:30 in the morning one day this week, I was like, are you awake? I need to tell you something.
That's right. And she's like, you need to ask these questions. You need to, and I love that from Liz, because I know that she's like behind. Sometimes the party cannot be the face of something.
Yes.
For partisan reasons, we need, but Liz is so active, and David was the same way too, and I love that about it. But it's a two-way street. Organizations and groups and individuals have to be working with Liz the same way. I'm going to ask a general question here, which I think is a good question, and I'm going to go to Bryan first. Is there a Great Lakes Democratic Coalition?
Organization, as an official organization, probably not. I don't know of any, Joe. I don't know if you now.
There's not, but there's a few folks out there talking about putting one together, mostly through a lens of like fundraising, because so much fundraising, like you guys get solicited all the time, right? By candidates, by parties, all that stuff, and most of that doesn't then leaves our states. So I think you think you're doing the right thing, and the DNC is going to give all your money back to Ohio. That's not how it works. So a lot of discussion about that, but then also some activist discussions about how we move the Midwest more generally.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say, and you've seen, I'm sure some of you have seen him or heard him, Paul Kendrick is here.
Yeah.
And he has an organization, I don't even know how big it is. It acts like it's huge. It might be just him. But it's called Rust Belt Rising. And, we started paying attention to the work that he was doing and his folks. And we connect with them. Well, when I say we, I don't really, I should have said this at the beginning, I don't really work inside the party, not the Democratic Party, certainly not the other party. Most of my activism is coming through Indivisible or Promote the Vote, which is in Michigan, which did all the things that Deb was talking about in Pennsylvania. So I'm kind of outside the party structure, but I understand one of the things you said in the previous previous session that I wrote down, which is that the party provides the skeleton, provides the bones.
Oh, it's Deb who said that. She's
Was that
right,
you that
yeah.
said that? Okay.
Yeah.
The party provides the bones, and then the activist groups, all these activist groups that pop up are adding meat to those bones. And we need the bones, and we need the meat.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
So there's got to be a coalition, if you will, between the Democratic Party itself, structurally, and all of these activist groups, many of which were invented in 2017.
It's true.
Yep.
Right?
A couple questions from the audience reflect on gerrymandering. And I know you've already mentioned that, Bryan, how you were able to go directly to the people in Ohio. We've had 2 constitutional amendments in Ohio. I'm going to go to Deb and ask, how bad is it in Pennsylvania? How do you fight back, especially if you can't go directly to the ballot?
So it's fairly complicated what happened. We had a devastatingly bad map in 2010 that was then thrown out. The congressional map was thrown out in 2018. And in 2018, we didn't have a single congresswoman in our delegation. And we had, and this is a statistic I used to tell my kids as a government teacher, we had 1 million more Democratic votes in Pennsylvania, but the delegation was 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats.
That sounds
Then what happened was they threw out, Right, so they threw the federal courts threw out the map, and then we went to a 9-9 Republican Democratic map and elected 4 women to our congressional delegation. So the congressional map is pretty fair. What's not fair, our state house map was actually drawn by our House Democratic minority leader, and the reason she got to do it was that we have the Republicans wouldn't even discuss it with us, but we elected a Democratic state Supreme Court, which then approved this map, and it's pretty fair. I have some problems with it. One of the bad things was I got drawn out of my district when I was running, but in general, we then got this Democratic state house. The state Senate map is horribly bad. I would have to say, not to cast aspersions on my own party, I think it's a buddy mander. You know, the Republicans and the Democrats, incumbents, both drew the map for themselves in many ways. And this is why you need an independent commission. So we are really, Democrats are really in bad shape in the Senate for the next 10 years until we get a new map. It's bad. So anything that this House Democratic State House passes will probably go to die in the state Senate unless there's a lot of negotiations going on. So it's a bad situation. Fair District, Pennsylvania is still trying to get an independent commission through, and I mean, I don't know what the chances are for that. You know, we have millions of people have signed petitions for this, and you know, we've had no luck getting it through the State House. So,
thank you, Deb. And you know, in Ohio, as you know, former Republican Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who sided with Democrats on the congressional maps and legislative maps, has now dedicated herself to helping end gerrymandering as we know it in Ohio. Yes. And I was just going to turn to Liz and tell us what you think is going to happen on this issue in the coming years.
Well, let's all send Maureen O'Connor vitamins and Wheaties because we need her to be wildly successful. She has been quietly pulling together the process to do another referendum, a ballot initiative, not a referendum, a constitutional reform. Again, you're going to see just like our reproductive rights language looks a lot like Michigan's. Our redistricting language is probably going to look a lot like Michigan's to move this to an independent commission. And we have to be really clear-eyed that that's the path. I wish I could tell you that we have some magical formula to suddenly make Mike DeWine or Matt Huffman or Frank LaRose care about fairness. We don't. And they do not, let's be really clear, they do not care. They do not care about fairness, they care about power. And that will trump their decision-making every time as long as they are allowed to lead this process. And not a single one of them has the spine or the courage or frankly probably the care to stand up to their party on this separately. So hopefully you'll see redistricting on the statewide ballot as a constitutional amendment soon, not this year, but maybe in 24. And if you'll all recall, because of the current reforms we have, whether this stuff moves or not, we're going to be back at the table drawing new maps every 2 years until we fix it again. So for those of us who've lived through it as activists or leaders, I'd like to get off that hamster wheel, personally. But I think that really this is about the path forward for us is really critical on these structural reforms. So redistricting, same-day voter registration, and maybe some judicial reforms to take partisanship out of these races.
Thank you. So here's a question for the panel, and anyone can step forward. 5 minutes. Oh, in that case, I'm going to finish up and I'm going to just ask each of you to, if you have any closing remarks. We have 5 minutes left, and I'll start with Deb.
Okay, closing remarks. I wish I were Michigan. No, no. I see a lot of hope. You know, the work that we did in 2016 forward has given me the hope that if we can flip counties outside of Philadelphia who have been historically Republican since the Civil War, we can do anything. And I'm very encouraged that we have an African-American woman speaker in our State House. I think that's terrific. So I am very encouraged that we have a Democratic governor. This is the first time we've had back-to-back Democratic governors. Historically, we've gone back and forth between Democratic, Republican governors. So there's a lot to be hopeful for here. And the problem is, in the blue areas like I am now in, how do you keep that momentum going and the drive of activism when it seems like everything's going well? You know, we could very well lose the presidency in 24, and we could lose a number of state house seats. So we cannot be at rest.
Thank you. Bryan?
Well, yeah, like I said, Michigan is feeling good today, and hopefully most of the people, most of the activists, most of the party members are looking at that saying, that was a great victory, let's get moving again, because we still have, as I said, still got a lot of work to do. But I want to go back also to, seriously, right after the 2016 election, something snapped in Michigan. I know that my wife and I went to Washington, D.C. for the Women's March. We were also there on Inauguration Day, but that's a different story. We were there for the Women's March, and we came back saying, this is different. This is different. And when we came back, we were looking for where was the energy, and we found it. We found it in Indivisible at that point, but we also found it in all these groups that popped up. And we also found it in the party, in the Democratic Party. Laura Barnes, our chair, implemented a project called Project 83, which, if those of you who remember Governor Dean and his 50-state solution, Michigan has 83 counties, and the Project 83 is cover every county, run somebody everywhere. Don't leave anybody, any Republican running unopposed. We haven't got there yet, but it's still on the agenda. We got to find people to run. We have to pick up the school boards. We have to go all the way down to the bottom of the ballot. Even though those are nonpartisan, we know who these people are. So there's a ton of work, but that's not going to stop us from celebrating a little bit. And I hope that you and Lavora can pass some of this on to Ohio and get Ohio up.
Well, I want to leave, particularly for our folks from Ohio in the room, you with some good things to think about, right? Which is coming into 22, I think it's really easy for us to look at places like Michigan and say, why not Ohio? And there's a lot of really compelling reasons for why we're not there yet, but we can be. And it's important for us not to lose sight of progress on our journey to building back power. Because it's really easy for us to look at the Senate race and say, man, Tim ran a good campaign, the National Party disinvested, it's over. But we cannot let a statewide win be the only metric of progress. We will get there. And to give you some things to think about that were really positive from the last 2 years is that for the first time since 2008, Ohio did something really important last year, which is won a competitive congressional race. We haven't done that since 2008 as Democrats. And last year we won 3. We ousted a 20-year incumbent in Cincinnati and Steve Chabot. We sent Greg Landsman to Congress. We protected Marcy Kaptur up here in Northwest Ohio in her toughest, it's a 58% Trump district. And we sent Marcy Kaptur back to Congress. And we elected Amelia Sykes in the new 13. Our delegation is now majority female. Our Democratic delegation in Congress is majority female and is majority African American women. And so when you look at those races and say, we had a good candidate, they ran great campaigns, the state party built a massive operation to support them, and the national party invested. And with those ingredients, we can do really, really good work. And all of our partners in the other and the ecosystem are all equally invested in these races. So think of it as a trial run, right? As a test subject of how we can build this out to the next level. But we're going to also do that along the way by partnering with really important issues that align with our values. So if you haven't signed up yet, I know Lana's here, and I'm sure she'll be able to tell you, if you're not circulating petitions to put reproductive rights on the ballot in Ohio this year, please come see Lana, or I'm sure there's other people here. We have got to get this on the ballot. First and foremost, because it's what's most important for people who can get pregnant in Ohio. And very similar to the Michigan language, it's Roe Plus. So it protects the right to abortion care, birth control, IVF, a whole host of other things. This is important organizing work for us. It keeps our volunteers active. It keeps our folks focused. It speaks volumes to those. We're here, right, talking about values, because it's a DEMS 101 conference. What are our values? If we really believe in healthcare choice and freedom for women, we got to put our money where our mouth is, and we got to show up big. So the state party has made a commitment to 100,000 signatures for the campaign. But get involved with Planned Parenthood, get involved with ACLU, whoever it is, go out and get it done. It's going to signal to folks who we are and what we stand for. I'm so hopeful about the future, and I think specifically the last thing I'll say is, and I know Paul, I don't think Paul's here, Paul Kendrick, he runs a group called Rust Belt Rising. But you guys all know our beloved Senator Sherrod Brown, he hates that phrase, Rust Belt, right? So in 2024, we have to think about Ohio as the must belt. We must have these successes for Ohio women, for our congressional delegation, for redistricting reform, and we have to send Sherrod Brown back to the United States Senate. He is not only our voice, he's the voice of people all over this country who want something better. And so putting all of these big pieces together, taking the time and coming to stuff like this, it may seem small, but it all adds up to the things we need to do to make this state a competitive place again. So thanks to all of you for being here and for everything you're going to do to work on this.
Let's have a round of applause for the panel. Thank you.
Amelia Sykes. It's the new 13th district in my congresswoman. I'm very proud. Excited to have a Democrat representing me. Awesome.